Mr. President, it's important, I think, that we acknowledge a very simple truth that few people can disagree with, and that is we are living at this moment in the most difficult time of our lives. And I say to the American people, if you are feeling anxious, feeling depressed, if you are feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling confused, if you are feeling angry, you are not alone.
So lawmakers are now pushing for Congress to pass extra weekly boosted unemployment benefits for people that are financially struggling during this crisis. Many senators are urging that Biden and his administration send out the fourth stimulus check, and I actually agree with them, everybody. I think it has to be done. So Republicans want to fast-track a proposal to replenish a fund to help sideline workers, saying slow action could mean big tax hikes on businesses that were forced to shut down at the height of the crisis. The idea has the backing of the Minnesota governor, who is also proposing to spend billions of dollars of the projected budget surplus to make sure workers are covered by the state's unemployment fund if Minnesota faces another crisis. State employment officials say it would take time to restore the fund to pre-crisis levels without help from the legislature this year. And Republican Senator Jason, one Republican senator, supports the bill to replenish the unemployment fund. He told CNN this fund was there for our workers when they got laid off, but there's no better way to kill our job growth coming out of this recession than to have this tax go on our small businesses. The good news, though, is that Democrats in the House have signaled support for the idea, but they say they're worried that big businesses that saw their profits increase during the crisis will benefit. One representative said, "When we think about how we're intervening, one of the things we're talking about is making sure we are targeting our resources to the businesses that have been hit the hardest." Roughly 1 in 5 people in Minnesota received unemployment benefits at some point during this crisis, and according to the state, the historic level of requests drained the state's unemployment insurance trust fund, which sat at around $1.7 billion in January 2020. Minnesota then borrowed more than $1 billion from the federal government to keep the unemployment payments coming in. Many states borrowed from the federal government during the crisis to cover unemployment costs, but more than half have already paid the federal government back. Minnesota is among 9 states in the Virgin Islands that owe the federal government a combined total of about $39 billion, and I know there are thousands of people that can actually use this extra weekly benefit. So as the crisis just continues, it needs to be sent out. Stimulus checks have to be approved. But still, momentum for a fourth round of checks is building in the halls of Congress, as more than 80 congressional Democrats and Kamala Harris have now expressed support for additional payments to people. According to Newsweek, the latest sign of support came when members of the House Ways and Means Committee wrote a letter to President Biden calling on additional payments to be made as Americans continue to work through the crisis. The letter called direct payments a lifeline to Americans who have been impacted by the crisis, and went on to say the consistent sources of relief are imperative right now. According to the lawmakers, the crisis has served as a stark reminder that families and workers need certainty in this time. They deserve to know that they can put food on the table and keep a roof over their head. According to Newsweek, the latest sign of support came when members of the House Ways and Means Committee wrote a letter to President Biden calling on additional payments to be made as Americans continue to work throughout this time. The letter called the direct payments a lifeline to people who've been impacted by the crisis the most, and went on to say that consistent sources of relief are imperative right now. According to Newsweek, those who signed the letter also argued that a fourth and possible fifth check could keep an additional 12 million people out of poverty. Those checks could potentially reduce in poverty from 44 million to 16 million, when combined with measures from the American Rescue Plan, such as the upcoming child tax credit payments. Any fourth stimulus check would have to be approved by both House and the Senate before it lands on Biden's desk to be signed into law. Democrats may face an uphill battle, everybody, as the split in the 50-50 Senate is held, with the Democrats holding a tiebreaker via Kamala Harris.
For you than any time in American history. Today, corporate profits are at an all-time high, and CEOs, heads of large corporations, have seen huge increases in their compensation packages. And let me just give you a few examples. Everybody in America is worried about the high price of gas. We drive around, and today gas prices are higher than they were yesterday. But while gas prices are soaring, shock of all shock, oil company profits are now higher than they have been in over 7 years. Gas prices are soaring, and guess what? Large oil companies are making huge profits. In fact, in the last quarter, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, and BP made nearly $25 billion in profits in 1 quarter. Gas prices soaring, profits of the oil companies soaring as well. But that's not all. Everybody is worried about high food prices. Many senior citizens living on fixed incomes go to the grocery store and they get very upset about seeing increased prices in meat and vegetables and everything else. Well, turns out that the food industry is also enjoying huge increases in profits. In fact, Kroger, one of the largest grocery store chains in America, made a record-breaking profit of some $4 billion in 2021, while its stock price jumped 36% in the past year. Its CEO got a 296% pay raise over the past decade, and they have been able to spend $1.5 billion on stock buybacks and dividends to enrich their wealthy shareholders. Food prices soaring, and yet company after company in the food industry are making huge profits. For the people on top, the good news is that it is not just that corporate profits have never been better. That's good news. But even better for them is that CEO compensation has never been higher. You know, there was a time way back in the 1950s when I was growing up when CEOs did very, very well. They made 20 times more than their average worker. Well, if you are a CEO, the good news is those days are long gone when you only made 20 times more than your average workers. Today, as I am sure the CEOs of this country know, they are now making 350 times more than what the average worker in America makes. 350 times more. Talk about greed. And by the way, at a time when we pay the highest prices